Pair programming is a really powerful way to greatly improve your development skills and make an application better. The idea is that two people working together are more focused, come up with better ideas, and they fill in the gaps for each other. In fact, there have been studies that have proved that two people working together increases productivity over two people working separately. The problem is that working together has historically meant being in the same office. So what do you do if you work remotely, or if you're a solo developer, or if you're working on an open source project all alone? Microsoft has tackled these issues by creating live sharing, a free tool built into Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. In this video, we're going to look at how to use live share, how to configure it, and what some of the advanced features are. Now, there is no download for today's video, but if you look in the description, you'll find links there to sign up for my mailing list and for my Patreon. We're closing in on the next bonus for Patreon members, where you get a making of video for one of my Monday videos. That'll be a fun one. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There are a lot of tutorials out there that teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should or shouldn't do it, what the pitfalls are to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Okay, let's start in Visual Studio, and I have opened the Timco Retail Manager application. That's not because we're going to go over code today. In fact, like I said, there is no code for this video. What I'm going to do is just use this as a project to work in. So let's say I'm working in here. I open the API up, and let's go to the API itself and look at a controller. And I come in here to the products control, and I say, you know what? Something's just not quite right here. I don't know what's going on. And I want to bring somebody else in to help me work on this. Well, it used to be you'd have to have someone actually come to your desk and look over your shoulder as you walk them through the project. But now we have this option up here called Live Share. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to share your Visual Studio application and the source code with somebody else. And here's the really cool thing. You're not giving them the source code. You're just allowing them to see it, so that when you stop sharing, the code goes away on their platform. So let's start off with just the basics. I'm going to bring in Visual Studio Code first, and I am going to shrink down the Visual Studio, and then I'm going to bring Visual Studio Code over, and let's bring it over like so. So we have two on the screen. Now it's not great because there's not a lot of screen real estate here to share between the two of them. But this will at least give you a viewpoint so you can see the differences on the two screens. And then I'm going to switch between them so you can see what's going on for each platform specifically. But let's start with both up, okay? So Visual Studio Code has nothing open. There's no files, no folders, nothing. In Visual Studio, I'm ready to ask for help. And so I come up here to Live Share and click the button. And it says, okay, we're getting ready to share. And it's going to prep. And it says, okay, invitation link copied to the clipboard. Now, right now, this is a read-write invitation. I'm going to show you how to do a read-only in a minute. You can click the little link here that says make read-only, but there's other ways of doing that. Okay, so I've got a read-write, which means that somebody else can make changes to my code as well. If you don't want that, make it read-only. But this will allow us to work together on the project. So now that I have that link copied to the clipboard, I come over to Visual Studio Code, which this is on the same machine right now, but it could be on a different machine. So it could be across the country, across the globe. It doesn't matter. You just send this URL to somebody. They copy the URL and come to this Live Share. Now, if you don't have Live Share installed in Visual Studio Code, what you do is go to your extensions and search for Live Share. You'll get this first extension right here from Microsoft, Live Share, and that's the extension you want. So you just install that, and you're good to go, okay? Once you do, you get this icon over here. You click the icon, And now we're going to join collaboration session. So we have somebody else create a session, and they gave us a link. I'm going to click this join collaboration session. Since it's on my clipboard, it's already pasted it in for me, and I can just hit enter. Now that I do, it's going to take a second to load up, because what it's doing is it's going to stream down all the files. Notice all of the files look similar to over here. Now over here on the left, it also said, hey, Tim Corey just joined your live share session. Now, let's shrink down this pane here. We start in the same place on the client. Let's call this the right-hand side of the client, the one who is viewing the code but doesn't own the code. Okay? So the client starts in the same location as the sender or the server. All right? So, but now on the client, I could highlight this row, and notice on the left-hand side, it highlighted that and it said, hey, Tim Corey just did that. On the left-hand side, I could highlight over here. And it says, hey, Tim Corey highlighted this. Now, Tim Corey and Tim Corey, yeah, it's a little confusing. But this would tell you, hey, the server, let's call it server, is Visual Studio and client is VS Code. Server has just highlighted this section right here. Now notice I'm highlighting something else. So I don't control what they highlight. But what I highlight, they see. And what they highlight, I see. It gets even cooler though, because let's just say that on the server, I say, what if we put a breakpoint right here? Notice the breakpoint pops up over here. And I say, you know what? No, I don't like that. Let's take the breakpoint off there. Notice it goes away on the left-hand side. Let's come down here and put the breakpoint right here. And it puts it on the left-hand side as well. So you can see how both can work on the same project at the same time and kind of interact back and forth. But let's say that on the client, the person who is viewing this says, you know what? I don't even think it's in this controller. So while the server is still on this product controller page, on the client, I can go over here and say, you know what? I think it's actually in the sales controller. Open that up, scroll down and see, yeah, I think the issue is right here. And the person on the server says, wait a minute, where is that? Well, what you can do is go over to the live share option, and you can come up here. So you mouse over the session details, and notice this little icon right here. It says focus participants. If you click that on the client, it sends the server to that location. It says Tim Corey has focused your attention. So the client said, hey, you know what? Come over here, and just by clicking that button, sent you to that page. Now notice it also opens up as a preview page. So you're still back over here. You can still come back to where you're at, but it had opened you up to this location because it says that way you can both be on the same page where you're at. Instead of saying, okay, in the controllers, go down and look for the sales controller. Now, obviously in a small project like this, that's not too bad. But what if we were in, let's say the WPF project in the class library? Well, that could get confusing. Which class library you're at, you know, oh, you're down here in the, I don't know, product endpoint. And you're trying to explain where you're at. No problem. Let's just focus. Now, from server to client, we've already seen client to server. But what if we did the other way? Where he said, I think we're actually in the product endpoint. That's the issue. Well, you can come over here to the live share tab. Now, if you don't have the live share tab, you go to view, other windows, and then live share. All right. So you click on that. It's going to open this up. And you can, there's options up here, and one of them is to send the focus. And that's this. Let's see if I can get a zoom in on this. There we go. So this little icon right here, that's the kind of message box with an exclamation point in the middle of it. It says focus participants. Okay. So if we click on that, watch on the right-hand side, it just sent the focus request. On the right-hand side, it says focus. Tim Corey has focused your attention. And now it's highlighting what Tim is highlighting. And I can even highlight inside that. All right. So now it's giving you that focus. So back and forth, you can go saying, okay, look at this, and send them there. And on the other side, you can say, oh, but look at this, and send them to another spot. So it very quickly allows you to go back and forth, even through the entire solution and all the different project files. Because as you noticed, in Visual Studio Code, it has all of my files. They're all here. Now, they're not actually downloading a whole system or a whole folder onto your desktop. It's not download the whole project per se. There's some magic going on behind the scenes of how it does it. But essentially, this is an encrypted version of your project. It's not giving your source code away. So this allows you to work on your source code with somebody else without necessarily giving them your project. Okay, so even closed source projects would work. All right, so now we've seen focus. What are some other things we can do while we're working on it? Well, if you notice, mouse over the API helper. Okay, we get some IntelliSense issues here, and it says, okay, here's the things you can do with this API helper. And you come up here, and you could probably do something similar here with our these changes. Okay, but then also let's go over to the solution and go back to the product controller. Okay, and I'm back over here on this side as well. And if you look, we have the config, which is iConfiguration, iConfiguration. Now, a config allows us to get information about the app config or app settings.json. Okay. Well, if I came down here, notice it's read write, so I can actually write code. Again, on the client side, I can say _config dot. And look at that. I have IntelliSense. So all the things that are available to me in IntelliSense are available on the client as well as the server. Now, VS Code looks a little bit different than Visual Studio. But this is a good time to point out that I am working on two different platforms, VS Code and Visual Studio. You can work with the same platforms. So you can have VS Code to VS Code. You can have Visual Studio to Visual Studio. Or you can have, as I'm doing here, a mixed mode. And I'm just doing a mixed mode to show you kind of the differences and comparisons. But just note that both work, all right? So now I have access to IntelliSense. I can say, you know what, let's get a value, and we're going to say, oops, you know what, we want a string value. And now I can ask for this object or this type inside of my JSON app settings.json file. And notice that when I take out the semicolon, I get the red squiggly. And it says semicolon expected. So over here, I could go, oh, you know what, you missed a semicolon. Put a semicolon in, you're working together. All right, so we have access to our source code. We can make changes. We can focus attention. What else can we do here? Well, let's go over to the home controller. And in the home controller, I am going to put a breakpoint on, this is the API. I'm going to put a breakpoint on the index for the view. And actually, let's put a variable or two in here. So I'm going to put let's do it in VS Code. Why not? So I am going to say string test equals Tim, and int or bool is alive equals true, and int age equals 41. Okay, so now we've got some values in variables. Are we using them? No, but we have some values in variables. Let's come back over here to Visual Studio. We're going to change our startup type to just the API. So we're not going to start the WPF project. All right. Now, remember, I am sharing these two screens. These are like they're two different computers. Let's hit start. So we're going to go to debug, start debugging on the server. Okay. So it's going to build, and it's building the background. You see this console here, which let's shrink down the the debug. See the console and all the output here? That matches up with Kestrel. So last line is 200 image / x - icon. There you go. Okay, so it matches up with what Kestrel has. And you can see it on the client as well as the server. So if I go to a different page, I can do work here. All right. Now it looks like I haven't hit my breakpoint. My breakpoint is saying the source is different from the original version. Okay. So let's stop this. That comes because I guess I made a change and didn't save it. So let's do it again. So we're gonna launch this again. This time the source hasn't changed while it's running. And there we go. We've hit a breakpoint. Okay, so notice the breakpoint on the right as well. And if I mouse over variables on the right, I can see the values. So it says Tim, it says age is 41. Okay, I can even go into my debugging menu and look at the locals. And the locals say, okay, you've got 4 variables you can look at. You got age, is alive, and test, as well as this. All right. And if I go on the left-hand side, the server, and I go to my locals, I have those same 4 variables with the same 4 values. So if I expand into this and looked at all the different options, down here is logger, role manager, and user manager. Well, this, you scroll down, has logger, it has role manager, and user manager. A little different order, but they're all here because this one is has the non-public members hidden, and I think the one on the right does not. Okay, so but they're all here. So even if you're on Visual Studio Code, you can help debug Visual Studio that's running on a different machine in a different location. Okay? You can do a lot of the same things you can do in Visual Studio over here in Visual Studio Code. Okay? So it looks like I can't change that value here. So that may be read only. But I can change, I believe, in my locals. Let's try it over here. Oh, no, look it. It now says age is 42 over here, even though it's 41 over here. Maybe a refresh thing. If I mouse over it, it does say age is 42. So a little bit of maybe a lag or refresh kind of thing, but it does look like I can make a change, and it changes over here as well, and it changes the actual value. So if we're debugging, I can change variables and then continue just like the server can. All right. So this, again, there's that feature parity and the ability to work together and collaborate on this type of work. Also note at the top of VS Code, we have the options for step into, step over, step out, restart, and even disconnect our debugging session. So I can do that here. I can do it over on the left-hand side and the server as well. Okay, so that allows us to work on both sides in a similar manner and work together collaboratively on making this application work. Now let's do this. Let's take Visual Studio Code out for a minute, and we're just going to look at Visual Studio, and we're going to look at some of the options that come with the Live Share tab. I want to kind of zoom in and give a little more screen real estate. So we're going to just do Visual Studio for now. Then we're going to go over and look at VS Code and the same or similar options. Okay? So over here in our Live Share pane, notice it says who is participating. Okay, so this is we're on the server right now. This is the Visual Studio. So this Tim Corey is actually in VS Code. That's the client. Okay, so the participant is the client. All right. Now shared servers and shared terminals. Okay, what are these? Well, I can share a web server. So if we publish this API locally, so on localhost port, whatever it is, 5001, well, I can actually share that port to somebody else, to the client. And so they can actually interact with a front-end website as if it's running on their machine, even though it's running on my machine. And when we hit, they can go and hit breakpoints, and I can see them hit breakpoints, and there's some really cool stuff you can do with that. For example, maybe someone has experienced a problem on your website, but you can't figure out what they're doing. You could actually start up a live share session, share the server from your server to someone who is having that problem. They can walk through the steps that they're doing while in the background you're watching the variables and debugging or putting breakpoints in, pausing it, and looking as they're working. Okay? So there's a lot of great options there. The terminal allows you to share your command prompt with them. Let's just do that real quick. So I am going to share a terminal in read-write mode. Okay? So I have opened up, and it opened up really large. So I have opened up PowerShell. That opened up for me when I said share terminal. And that's PS number 1. Well, if I bring Visual Studio Code back, you'll notice I have a terminal open down here now called PS number 1. That happened automatically. Watch what happens if I type down here in VS Code. Notice on the left-hand side, it is typed. If I hit enter, I can see the results, and so can they. If they say, you know what, clear the screen, it clears on the right-hand side as well. So that shared terminal allows you to even interact at the command line with each other. So let's go ahead and close that out. Notice it closes on Visual Studio automatically, and the shared terminal goes away. This last one is a newer feature that they have recently added, and it's called audio call. So the idea here is maybe you probably want to talk to the person while you're working together. It makes sense. And what we used to do is we would have a phone call, or we'd get on Skype, or we'd get on Microsoft Teams or Slack or something, and have some kind of communication going back and forth between us while we're working on the live share project. Now they have built in a voice over IP system, so you don't even have to get on a different platform. You can just say start audio call. Click it, and it's going to start on an audio call, and another person can join in. Okay? Now, when you're in the audio call, you can make modifications to the settings. So if there's a little drop down here, it says audio call settings. And then it's going to come up, and let's move this over so you can see it. I can't, so let's zoom out and zoom back in. There you go. So it's going to choose your output device. That's going to be what you hear, where you hear it from. And then choose your input device, which microphone you want to use. So if you have more than one output device, more than one set of speakers, I have multiple. If you have more than one input device, I have just one right now. That will allows you to dial in exactly which one you want. Okay, so that's what the settings are. They're right up in this drop-down menu, audio call settings. Okay, now each side has to call the other person. It's not like you can say call and the other side is going to pick up automatically, unless they have that setting. Okay, there is a setting for that. But let's go look on the other side. This audio call is still live. Now, I'm not going to actually send voice over it, because I actually am, because I'm sitting on my Rode Podcaster mic, but we're not going to hear it. Okay, so we go over to the live share session in VS Code. Okay, down here is audio call, and it says start audio call. Now, you're not going to see this if you just installed live share. You have to come over to live share, and let's look in mine. It says live share audio. Okay, this is in preview right now. But live share audio allows you to also make audio calls in VS Code. Okay? So it says they're both in preview. These are both preview features. All right. So now, back in our live share session, we can say start call. And now it's going to call the other direction. It's going to call into essentially the server. It's going to meet in the middle. And now, notice the participants. We have Tim Corey, which is you, which is helpful because then there's also Tim Corey who's speaking right now, because that's the VS or Visual Studio. So that's Visual Studio, the server. This is the client, and I can go ahead and mute myself which is good. So let's mute myself. Now it says muted. If we go back to Visual Studio, you'll see that now I have 2 people on the call, and one of them is muted, one of them is me. All right, which they're both me, but okay. So that's how you do a call. Now let's look at VS Code real quick and see the configuration, which is a little bit different. So if you want to change what your inputs and outputs are for your audio call, how do you do that in Visual Studio Code? Well, you actually mouse over the audio call participants and notice a little gear icon. Click that, and there's configure speaker and configure microphone. So configure speakers, you click that, you choose which speaker you want to use, and then you're good to go. Same with the microphone, okay? And if you're done, when you're mousing over the audio call participants, you hit the red circle with a line through it to disconnect the audio call, and now you've hung up, okay? On the other side, notice that the client is hung up, but the server is still active. And that's where this little icon right here, the red icon, end audio call, and now you've hung up as well. All right? So there's some of the features that come with VS Code and with Visual Studio for live share, but we're not quite done yet. Let's look at a few more things before we get into the settings and configuring this, because there are some configuration options that are pretty significant or pretty important. So let's start first by how do you end this? Okay? Well, in Visual Studio, there's a stop button. So if you want to leave the live sharing session, which you're controlling, you're the server, then you would click the stop button. Also in that drop down is copy link, because you're not limited to just one-on-one. You can have multiple people in a session. Okay, the default is 5. I'm going to show you how you increase that to 30. All right, which may sound crazy until you think about a classroom situation where the teacher may be providing their code and everyone else is looking at it and walking through the code. Okay, that'd probably be a read-only scenario. You probably wouldn't want read-write. Okay, and we'll see that in just a minute. But on the server, I can hit stop, and that's going to stop the client as well. All right? So if I were to do that, let's bring this back over here, and let's shrink this back down. Okay? Now notice I'm in the live share, and I hit stop to leave live share session. Watch on the right-hand side, it says the host has ended the collaboration. Open folders and editors will now close. Hit OK. And VS Code kind of resets itself. There's now nothing open. I have no access to that source code anymore. It's gone. All right. So that's what you do on the host side, which ends all the client sessions. All right. Let's move this off and let's expand this back out. We're going to do this again. Only this time we're going to do a read-only session. Notice I said that you can click that link when you start sharing to change it to read-only, or right up here in this live share tab, you can do a drop down and you can say start read-only session. Also note that there is the join session option if you're joining a session from a different Visual Studio or VS Code. Let's do the read-only session, okay? And that's going to copy to the clipboard. We can come back over to VS Code. We can come down to Live Share, join a collaboration session, hit Enter, and now it's going to load up our code for us. Okay, it's loading right now. There we go. We're in the code. This is read-only. It's a little bit different. All right, so if I go into Controllers and I go to the Home Controller, and I say, you know what, I want to put a breakpoint right there. You can do that. Okay, those are allowed. And if you come back over here, you'll see that there are breakpoints. There's one breakpoint right here. Let's put a breakpoint in here, and they're over here. But now, let's say in VS Code, I want to change it to Timothy. You can't edit in a read-only editor. Okay, you're not allowed to make changes. This is more the visual to see things, but you can't do things. Okay? In fact, if I were to, let's kind of just put it over here. If I were to highlight this, nothing happens here on the left because this is the client, and the client has no control to make changes. But on the server, if I highlight something, we go back to our VS Code. Notice it's highlighted here to say, hey, this is what a server view looks like. We can change it, highlight down there, and it's not highlighting at all, actually. Excellent. So it's had a little bit of a quirk there, but it's supposed to. All right. But notice it's a little bit different in read-only mode. Okay. So read-only mode, only the person on the server can make the changes to, say, change this to be Timothy. So read-only mode allows me to change things on the server, but not on the client. So the client, I can't come here. Let's shrink this down. I can't come and change this back to be Tim. Okay, can't do it. Okay, notice it does say that it has not been saved, but I can't do anything to save it. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to show you. Let's close this connection on the client side. Okay, so we're in Visual Studio Code, and we say, you know what? We don't want to be connected to this anymore. How do we close this out? Well, we mouse over the session details area, and notice at the top, it highlights a couple of icons. One is that focus participants, and the other is leave collaboration session. Okay, I click that, and it goes away. All right, so now it's empty. There's nothing open, and now on the server side, if we look at the live share, there are 0 participants. Okay, so I'm still sharing. Notice the stop icon is still here, and on the upper right-hand corner it says sharing read-only, which you even drop down and do some things. But I'm not sharing it with anybody. No one has that link and is using it. Okay, so now I can hit end live share from this drop down. And there we go. Live share is done. Now I told you can make modifications to the settings. How we do that? Well, the same way you modify most settings, which is go to Tools menu, go to Options, and under Live Share. So there's Environment, where you probably start. You scroll down to Live Share, and there's just one setting section. That's called General. Now in here, I am currently on the Insiders build. Okay, so this is pre-release software, and you could be on the stable version, but I want to have all the latest and greatest features. So if you don't have some of the latest and greatest features, that's because you're probably on the stable build. But Live Share in itself is kind of pre-release. It's not been officially taken out of like a beta type phase. And sometimes people get a little bit uptight or a little concerned about using pre-release stuff. And I get that, because when you're in a development environment where you have to put out rock solid code, you don't want to rely on something that's still changing, where it may break your source code and it may cause major issues in production. You don't want that. This isn't something where the pre-release is a problem, because even if you're in a production environment, even if you're cutting edge business where you've got code that has to be absolutely reliable and all the rest, that's fine. This doesn't actually affect your product. If it goes down tomorrow, the only downside is you can't use it. That's it. Okay? So it definitely is okay to use the latest pre-release of Live Share. Okay? So I just want to kind of point that out. Now, in this section here, there's a few features. And since I'm using the Insider build, one of the options is increased guest limit. So it increases the guest limit from 5 to 30. So this is a brand new feature. And it allows you, like I said, to share with up to 30 people. 30 people read write. First of all, I'm not even sure you could do that. Maybe you can. That'd be crazy if you could. My assumption is that that is for read only. But, and I can't really test that. Okay, unless I get a classroom together and we do that. But even if it's just for read only, that has a really big impact on teaching this. So one of the things I encourage people, if you're working in a business where you have multiple developers, I definitely encourage you to do things like lunch and learns. Okay, a lunch and learn, the concept is that maybe once a week, you all get together in a conference room for lunchtime, and while you eat your lunch, somebody presents something they're learning. This would be a great way to show people in that lunch and learn, hey, let's all jump together and see how this collaboration with LiveShare even works. So you could have 29, 30 people connect to your session read-only, and you can show them how LiveShare works, and they can get used to it so they can then use it in the future. Or even, and this is one of those really cool things, even if you're a remote worker and there's people at the office, you could do a lunch and learn with them remotely and share your code and walk them through things where they could view it on their screens even though you're not in the room with them. So having that ability to have more than 5 people, to go up to 30, is really cool. Because what we used to do is like remote desktop, where you remote desktop in, or we do a video share. Kind of like what I'm doing with you right now, only it's live instead of pre-recorded. Okay? That's great, but there's no interactivity. Okay? You can't look somewhere else in my source code right now. You're stuck on this particular screen. And that's where this will allow you to expand that. Okay? And there's some other options in here. You can advertise your presence. So you can say, hey, I'm available, and people can see based upon your login. If you're available, they can ping you and say, hey, here's a live share link. Okay, kind of like an instant messenger type thing. You can say I'm available or not. Okay. You can also auto accept calls. Remember I said before that both people have to connect? Well, if you change this to true, then that's not true anymore. Okay, which saying it to true means it's not true. Saying it to true means that when someone else is the host, the server, and I'm the client, if they call me, my side's going to pick up automatically. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. Now, authentication. Anonymous guest approval. If they have the link, do you want to approve that or not? Okay, you can automatically accept them, reject them, or prompt you. All right. Now here I'm saying don't require guest approval. So if you change it to true, then it's going to prompt you for approval. Right? You can do code debugging. Allow guest control. Okay, you can debug session join behavior. There's a lot of options in here. Code editing. All right, I'm actually changing my settings. There's code editing. There's connection information. Right now, our connection mode is auto. You can change it to direct or relay. That's, again, the magic of how it connects behind the scenes. All right, and there's even information about what terminal. Okay, it's going to share the PowerShell terminal by default. Maybe you want to change it to a bash terminal or something else. Okay, you can change even the window type and the height and the width and all the rest. Those settings are all in Visual Studio. Okay, so that's the Visual Studio side and how to configure this. Let's go to VS Code, because VS Code is different. But if you go to the Live Share section, down here at the bottom under Help is Configure Settings. These will look very, very similar. Okay, so where the provider is, the allow guest task control, okay, for workspace tasks. Anonymous guest approval. Do you want to prompt, accept, or reject? That's the same setting we saw before. All right, and you can come down here through all the different options. And there is an option in here somewhere that talks about, there you go, Live Share increase guest limit from 5 to 30. There you go. All right, and down here is the guest approval required. So back up above was, are you going to prompt for anonymous people? Down here is where we actually ask for approval. All right, so kind of separate those settings a little bit. But there's a lot of information here you can tweak and configure. Very, very similar to what is in Visual Studio, just in a different place or a different wording. Okay, and this is more matches the VS Code style of options or settings. And notice here's one of those options: show read-only users in editor. You can say always versus while following. So if you follow a person, it will show up that the highlighting where I wasn't following that person, so therefore it didn't show them. But that's you can change it to say always, and even when they're read-only, you could follow them. Okay, so there's a lot of different options you can tweak in here, but that's really the basics of it. You know, on here, if I wanted to from VS Code start a collaboration session, I just click Start Collaboration Session or Start Read Only. So I click this, and it's going to start it, and it's copied to the clipboard. I'm started. I can send a link anywhere I want. I can copy it again, make it read only. I can start a call. You know, all this stuff is the same stuff as Visual Studio, but it's in VS Code. Now let's come up here and stop that session. We're not actually sharing anything. So recent contacts, I can actually email them and invite them to connect with me. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff here you can do in Visual Studio and VS Code, which means you can do it on a Mac, you can do it on Linux, or on Windows. Okay, so we're cross-platform, we're globally available. And that's one of the things I want to talk about is the idea of global availability. The idea that you work remotely from other developers no longer needs to be as much of a barrier to working with those developers. And that's what LiveShare allows you to do. So if you are working on a project and you have somebody that's even a country over, okay, so you know I'm in the US and somebody from Canada is helping me out, and we're trying to talk through an issue, I can say, you know what? How about I just live share you my project? You send the link over, they connect, they can look at my project with me, they can debug it with me, they can diagnose the problem, even write some code for me in my project, and it'll be very, very quick, it'll be responsive, and it will make my problem easier to both explain, and it will be more obvious to the person helping me how to resolve the issue. Because sometimes it's hard. I mean, you try to write a Stack Overflow post probably or question, or maybe you've read Stack Overflow questions, and sometimes they're very, very vague, and that's where people get frustrated because the issue, you know, someone says, I've got an error and I can't figure out what it is. And that's pretty much their post. And that gives you no context. What's the error? What type of Visual Studio using? What are you writing C# code? What are your plugins? There's a whole list of questions you could ask because you don't know the context. By sharing your code with someone, you'll know the context. They can see the context. They can help you and point out those little issues. If there's a spacing problem in a paragraph of code, they can just say, highlight that line, highlight it, and say, that's where it is, and you can see it right on your screen. They can even put the space in for you. So there's a lot of possibilities working with code. Now, obviously, this does not replace Stack Overflow because you're not just anonymously asking people for help, and people aren't just going to sit around waiting for you to send them live share sessions, okay? Unfortunately, I don't have time to live share with everyone in this audience, okay? There's 100,000 people who have subscribed, and 60 to 70% of the people who watch videos on my channel aren't subscribed. Which, by the way, hit that little subscribe button. What's it gonna hurt, right? Okay, but that means that there's about 300,000 people that have watched or are watching my videos. There's no way that I can support even a tiny fraction of them connecting with LiveShare. Okay, that's just not possible. I'm sorry. But if you have a friend and you're working together and you're learning together, then you could connect to each other's machine and work on it together. Again, if one of you is in Belgium and the other one's in Germany, no problem. Okay, there's a lot of possibilities here with LiveShare. So don't just limit yourself to I don't have a job, I don't have coworkers. These aren't problems, okay? You can do this for free between another developer you just met or someone you met at a conference or someone you met online. You can work together, okay? Open source projects. If you are, struggling to figure out how to even contribute to an open source project, and maybe there's someone there willing to help you, you might be able to do a live share session and work together on it, okay? If you have a mentor, you can connect on a live share session and they can help walk you through code. All right, a lot of options here. Think through the possibilities and definitely try out this feature. All right, so that's all I have for you today, but I want to make sure that you saw that in depth and got a handle on all the different pieces of live share. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.